Hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about skiving leather, something we haven't really touched on yet, but skiving leather is a little bit of a more advanced technique, and I'm going to move all these. Skiving leather is basically thinning down specific parts of leather. You can thin down the edges for your construction, or you can thin out the middle for pockets and stuff that you don't need thickness in specific areas. So I have a couple wallets here to show you why you might want to skive down leather. If we look at this wallet, that's a pretty thick edge. Now this is a sample wallet of a pattern that I'm working on, and when I make wallets for the first time, I don't skive anything down so I can see where the thickness is and what layers I might want to take the thickness down. If we look at this wallet only has about 3 ounces less of thickness than this wallet does, just 2 ounce and a half lining pieces, but you can see that it's almost half the thickness on the edge. We can thin our edges down for a bunch of reasons. The first is it's a really nice detail. You get a nice little sloped look to the edges of your piece. The other reason is you get your stitching chisels through the edges a lot easier because this is thinned out. Another thing you can do is you can use it for detailing. So on this piece, if we look, the edge here is super razor thin, so you don't have a big step up. But this is actually a 3 or 4 ounce piece of leather that's been skived all the way down. And the last thing is structural stuff. So this is the sheath on one of my skiving knives that I use. And what I've done, and I don't know if you can actually see this on camera, but when I put my knife into this sheath, right? Now it hits on the heel here so that it's never going to go in and cut my stitching, but just in case it does, I have a piece of leather in here that instead of just ending, so that, because I don't need it on the sides, what I've done is I've skived it down. And so it looks roughly the same thickness, but in reality there's a stopper piece of leather in here. Now that's all due to skiving. You don't get that weird look. It just like slowly thins out instead of just stopping and you have a bump here. So there are a bunch of reasons, and there are a lot of other reasons to skive leather too. Purpose of this video, we're just going to go through how to skive leather in a couple different ways. So as usual, there are a ton of different tool options to get the job done. We're going to focus on some hand tools today. You can use a bell skiver, which is a big machine. They're expensive though, so the hand tools are pretty rudimentary, take a little bit of more skill, but they require less space and they're fairly inexpensive. We have 3 Japanese style skiving knives and 2 French edgers. These are all from Weaver. These tools are great. They stay really sharp. They're affordable, but like most knives, you can go crazy. You can get multiple hundreds of dollars on a single knife. I really like these 2 options. So before we use any of our knives or skiving tools, I like to make sure that they're sharp. So I'm just going to use some compound here on a scrap piece of edge tan, and we're just going to strope. I never know how to say that word. We're just going to give these a quick polish. So I put a little bit of compound, and then we'll use this one, and I'm just going to polish it up, and you can see your compound. You see this dark here. You're just removing a little tiny burrs in the metal to make sure that you have a nice smooth surface, because especially with skiving tools, you want these things to act like razors. If you can imagine, like you take a sticker off your car window and it still leaves residue behind, you got to break out a razor blade and you kind of hit it at almost a parallel angle, but just an angle enough to remove that gunk. That's what you're trying to do with leather. So this stuff needs to be pretty sharp. So I'm just holding this at, you can kind of feel the angle. You're going to put it down like this, and I go back and forth. You can pull like this. I'm sure there are a lot of purists and a lot of different people that think things should be done specific ways. I always go back and forth like this, and you'll kind of feel it start to really slick. It's almost like burnishing. You'll feel it get nice and smooth. And once we're done with that, we're going to bring in some leather. So the type of skiving tool you're going to use is dependent on the type of skiving you want to do. Generally, in our work at least, there's 2 real different types of skiving. The first is we want to bevel an edge. The flat knife is really good for that because you're always going to be working your way down. So you're always going to be thinning something out more and more. If you want to, let's say you have a pocket here, right? And this is going to be your pocket top, and this is going to be below the surface. So you want the top of the pocket to be the full thickness of the leather because it provides structure with cards going in and out. But you want everything below it to be thinned out to remove some bulk. You're going to want to use something like a French edger because the French edger is going to allow you to remove the same amount of thickness of leather for extended periods. Whereas the flat knife, you're always going to be working down, 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 down. It's very difficult to sort of shave even thicknesses for long stretches of leather. So with the French edger, it's a fairly simple tool to use as long as you keep it sharp. We're going to dig in a little bit, and you're just going to kind of work your way down like this. And I'm not the best with these, admittedly. But once you get going and you get the right pressure, we're removing the same amount. It's almost like we're splitting this leather down a little bit. And so if we cut into the part that we just skived down and thinned out, this is the full thickness of the leather, and we can see here, we've thinned that out by about half, and it's the same throughout our whole piece with a little bit of work. So now we're going to use our flat knife to skive down some edges. And I use this method we use this method pretty much on every custom wallet that we make. This is probably the most common type of skiving that you're going to do. And this is the type of skiving where we're beveling down an edge, sort of like this, right? We create this edge here. And what we're doing is we're thinning out our edges so that we can get our stitching chisels through a little bit easier. We're removing some bulk so that when our wallets are closed, they have some nice thin edges. Now, one thing first on safety, you always want to make a sheath for these. These things, I'd never cut myself in like 15 years, really, using any other tools. These things, if they're floating around your workbench, without a sheath on them, they're so sharp that you just end up touching them and cutting yourself. So make sure you make yourself a little sheath for, just out of some scrap leather, for any flat knives that you have floating around. So first step, again, we're gonna stroke our blade. These are really important to keep nice and polished. And again, you can stroke like this. I just kind of go back and forth. I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments if there's a reason not to do this, but so far so good. This seems to work fine. And what you're looking for here, you're not really sharpening the blade itself. You use whetstones for that. You're looking to polish the blade. So if we look here, this is a new knife, and I haven't done any edge work on it. You can see how it's very, it hasn't been stroked, so it's not shined up at all. Whereas if we look at this knife, you have a mirror finish on it. And what that mirror finish is going to allow you to do, because we're kind of shaving through this leather, it's going to make it nice and smooth, and it's going to go through much easier. So we're going to use this knife today. Now I'm going to show you how to set up to get an edge, a beveled edge with skiving by hand that looks almost identical to something like a bell skiver, which is a machine done edge. So to start, I have two sets of calipers here. One is set up for my stitch line. So my stitch line is going to land right about there. My second set of calipers is set up to be a little wider than my stitch line. And I would never do this on the front of the leather, but this is just to show you. It's not quite the same distance, right? It's a little bit less, but I'm going to use these calipers on the back of my leather that I'm skiving to mark my skive edge. And what this is going to do is this is going to give me a nice clean line to line my blade up with, so that I know that my skive starts before my stitch line and then ends after it, so my stitch line is going to land in the middle. My stitch isn't going to end. My stitching isn't going to go through a piece of leather that's too thin, and I'm not going to be going through a full thickness of leather either. So this is the point where there are a lot of different ways to do this. Some people will get a nice sharp blade and they'll go all the way down their line like this, and they'll just work at it, and they'll work at it, and they'll work at it. That's a great way to do it if it works for you. The way that I do it is I dig in with, let's see, I'm right-handed. So I dig in with the corner of my blade that's facing the middle of my body, and I kind of work my way down. So I'm going like this, and then I move, and I go like this, and eventually we start working our way through this leather. And as you can see, having this line allows you to keep your skive super, super even, so it looks like it's almost machine done once you get the hang of it, right? Now I'm going to bring in a Sharpie to show you kind of how I'm doing things. So the way that I'm skiving, I'm not trying to go in an even amount every single time. I'm going to try to use a Sharpie here to show you. So if you were to use your blade to just kind of dig in and take a little bit and then go back and take a little bit more, you'd be cutting sort of even layers every single time until you get through. And there's nothing wrong with that. The way that I'm showing you how to do it is, we're going to go, if you can see where my cut is, so my cut is about right here, right now. I'm going to take my blade and I'm going to put it about halfway, where half has been cut a little bit and half has not been cut at all. And I'm going to work down and cut on the diagonal. So instead of going a little bit at a time like this, what we're doing is we're cutting like this. And we're taking off, we're cutting all the way through down to the edge every time we go. And I've just found that for me, that's a lot easier to control. Because you can kind of get into a rhythm. There we go. Once we are done, you can see we have our nicely beveled edge. We're ready to glue this down, and we will have our stitch line right in the middle of that skive. Now, the main question. Well, I can tell you how to do it, but in practice, how do you learn? Because this isn't something that you're just going to watch someone do, be told verbally how to do it, and then just do it. This, of all skills in leathercraft, for me at least, personally, has been the one skill that has just taken repetition over and over and over and over again. Because it's mostly about feel. You have to know what angle to hold your blade at, how to hold your blade. Depending on what type of blade you have, how far down do you want it to go? A lot of people will flip their blade over and sharpen it so that the bevel faces down. We get that comment a lot. I've just always done it like this, so I do it like this. My knife is sharpened and polished so that it goes through this way. It doesn't go through this way. There's a lot of personalization in this skill. A lot of people do it a lot of different ways. My best advice is, you can see that I'm skiving on a granite block. People will use glass too. You do not want to skive into wood. You don't want to skive into a cutting board, because we're not cutting perpendicular. We're cutting at a very extreme angle. The minute that you get through, if you're on like a rubber cutting board, you're going to go through and you're going to stick straight into the cutting board. And it just doesn't work. So that's the first thing. You want a hard surface, and you want to use that hard surface so that when you come through, your blade you're never digging straight in. You're floating across the top like this, right? The next thing is just simply repetition. To learn this skill, you have to practice it a lot. The first thing I would suggest is using sort of an oily hide. Just get a bunch of scrap of an oily hide. The oils in the hide will make your knife glide through a lot easier. So you can initially learn that. You just want to learn the pressure, the movements, the muscle memory. That's the first thing you want to learn. Skive your edge, and then when you're done, just cut it off. Make yourself another line with your dividers and do it all over again. So I have my clean cut edge, I've made my line, I'm just going to go and do it all over again. I'm going to put my blade and slowly start to work right through the leather. And while you're repeating this, it'll teach you a lot of things. It'll teach you the pressure that you need to use because you shouldn't be pressing hard. Okay? It shouldn't take a lot of muscle to do this. But it is a lot about technique. The way that you move your knife through the leather, the angle, the way that your grip is. I like to hold, I don't know if you can see this, but I have a pretty shallow grip on the knife, and then I use my pointer finger on the blade itself to sort of guide through with a slight little, it's a lot of pushing through with my arm and a little tiny fanning motion with my wrist. And you're going to learn all that, what works for you, because like I said, there are a million different ways, little tiny minuscule movements that everybody does differently to make this work for them. So once you've mastered all these skills, when do you use them? I have this little card pocket, little tea pocket to kind of give you an example. But I do want to touch on layering. So you're going to utilize your flat knife skiving edges when you're making multiple layered pieces. Now, as a personal tip, I like to leave the outside layer and the inside layer full thickness. And the reason I like to do that is because when you go through after you've sanded down your edges and you bevel them to sand them down and burnish them, if you have a ultra thin layer of leather, you've skived it down to be paper thin, which is what you can do with the inside layers. It's a lot easier for that beveler to cut through, and then you're going to see almost like a plywood look on your top. You're going to have like a little bevel in. So I like to actually leave my top layers on a bifold. It would be the pockets themselves, and then on my shell, if I'm doing a lined shell, what I'll do is I'll actually cut out the interior lining first. I'll skive down those edges, and then I'll glue it to my exterior leather so that my exterior is a full thickness throughout. And that way I can go and burnish and bevel this down with my edge beveler, get a nice burnish, and I have that full thickness there. I don't have to worry about if I sand through and I hit another layer because this is ultra thin. So what I personally like to do is I like to sandwich anything that's not the outer layer or the inner layer. I'll try to thin out as much as possible. So what does that look like in practice? I'll show you on this little card holder. So on a card holder, for example, this is just a tea pocket that you would layer other cards over, right? If we flip this over, now this is pretty thin, but say this was like 3 or 4 ounces. What we could do is we could use our calipers to measure out how thick the exposed area was, and we would lay that line down. Now we know that we're going to have another card laying below this, but everything under that, we could use our French edger, and this is like 2 ounces, so I don't know if I can get a good line here, but, oh, there we go. We can use our French edger to thin out the rest of it. Because as long as we have enough to hold our card, we don't need the full thickness, and this will result in our finished wallet being a lot more thin. Now, because we're removing an even amount the whole way, our edges are still going to have some thickness to them. And once we layer another piece of leather over that, you're going to feel that bump. So, in combination with that, we can take our flat knife and we can, well, I got to readjust here. We can give ourselves a line, and then we can go in and we can thin out the bottom of our pockets to be almost paper thin. See? So if we use these two skiving methods in tandem, we're able to remove a lot of bulk from our pockets. Now, of course, it's not necessary to make a functioning wallet, right? But let's show you the difference. So let's say that this is my center pocket, and this is going to be my bottom pocket. If this was unskived or in just a piece of leather, that's about right. If I were to put this here, you can see, you would be able to, you can feel there that step down because you have about 2 ounces, 3 ounces of thickness, and once the wallet's finished, you're going to feel that. Now, with the pocket that we just skived, remove some thickness, and then we beveled the edge down. If I put this on top, this is nice and smooth all the way down because we've created a gradual thinning out, and then at the bottom, we've made this almost paper thin. So when this is all constructed, you'll have a nice flat feeling set of pockets. And when you put your card in, where you have a lot of bulk taken up by leather here, and that you can feel, that bulk that you removed is going to be taken up by the actual card. So once you have a loaded wallet, if you have a wallet like this, and you put your cards in, and now all these pockets have been skived down, the wallet full is going to be a lot more slim than a wallet that you didn't do any skiving on. And that's one of the big reasons that I like to use it, because it creates, you're able to keep strength where you need it, but you're able to remove a lot of material so that your final project is a little more sleek and a lot more manageable in your pocket. Because a lot of the times when we're working with we're hand building leather wallets, we're using a little bit of a thicker material than a machine sewn piece. And so by removing some of that bulk, you're able to get your pieces down to a little bit more manageable size for, I want to say the general public, and I don't mean to be insulting or anything like that. There are plenty of people that love just huge saddle wallets, but a lot of people are used to just, they've always had sort of wallets that are machine made, and this allows you to kind of get a more uniform feel that people are used to. And so that's our little intro to skiving. You can go much more in depth with it, and we will in another video down the road. But if you haven't picked up any skiving tools, it's a great extra skill to learn. Once you've got construction down, it's a great way to add a little bit more detail to your work and to really make things feel a little bit more polished and sleek in the function department. So again, we have the Weaver, the Japanese skiving knives. I think they're called the Japanese straight knives. There's 3 sizes. I use all 3 sizes. I prefer the middle one for kind of all-around work. But the middle size is fairly interchangeable with the large size. The large size is really good if you're doing like a bag, a rolled edge on a bag. You can cover a lot more distance a little bit quicker. The small one is great for when you're doing little T pockets, if that's something that you want to do. I use that one a lot for, let me just grab, if you're doing curved things like this little one comes in really, really handy because it's a lot easier to get these detailed curves with one of these. And then remember, your French edgers are for removing mostly just uniform bulk over large sections. So thank you guys for watching so much, and we'll see you in the next one.